And here we have to talk about the fact that Europe is not prepared for winter. They really talk about the US screwing things up. Well, once again, the EU has really screwed things up. A country that we're going to probably get into some specifics on is Ukraine. They've really screwed things up. Once again, though, you have a Europe without leadership. You have a Ukraine without leadership. You have a Europe that is knee-deep in ideology and feelings. And also, Orange Man bad, for lack of a better word, to sum up their ideology, because they're stuck in that cycle as well. And they're just not dealing in the world of reality and understand that they're going to have to deal with Russia. They have to deal with the energy situation as it is, and they should be prepared for the winter that's coming, but they're simply not. And what's the situation in Europe then?
Well, I mean, it's going from bad to worse. I've just been reading, and for this purpose, Britain is still part of Europe. I mean, because of course, Brexit has only happened very recently, and the British energy system is still very integrated with the European one, and British policy making is, if anything, even worse on this question than European policy making is. But I've been reading that energy companies are now in absolute crisis in Britain because they just don't have reserves, and they're not able to buy gas because they can't afford to buy gas, because as they're price capped, they are unable to pass on the price of gas to their customers. And more of them are closing, and there are increasing risks of cuts and shortages across Britain. I would say, by the way, you remember we did a programme a short time ago about the petrol shortages and the fact that I mentioned that there was a lot of profiteering going on. Well, now that's become a conventional, except it's now universally accepted that a lot of it was about that. There was actually no shortage of petrol in Britain. Reserves of petrol are at, it turns out, are at record levels. But the gas situation is very, very bad. And it's very, very bad across Europe. And what happened again is that they were all looking to the Russians to save them by the Russians pumping more gas to Europe, selling more gas on the spot market. And of course, the time came in mid-October when people were expecting that the Russians would send more gas onto the spot market. And to people's shock and horror, it didn't happen. And we've discussed why. I don't think there's a political dimension to Russian decision-making, but the idea that the Russians could simply produce all this extra gas that people are demanding is simply not realistic. It doesn't work like that. In the meantime, Europe has a pipeline, Nord Stream 2, which is filling up with gas. And in the middle of an energy crisis, they can't bring themselves to switch it on. So it's just, wherever you look, it's totally dysfunctional. And again, no real explanation, no real policy about what to do, no desire, for example, to go to Moscow and to deal directly with Putin or indeed with Gazprom to see whether something could be sorted out and negotiated, and instead a situation where everybody is keeping their fingers crossed and hoping that there'll be a warm winter, because otherwise the supply shortages will become critical.
So they can't bring themselves to turn on Nord Stream for political reasons, which shows that they really couldn't give an F about the people at all. I mean, this is all if they really cared about their people, if the EU really cared about their people, which we know they don't, but if they did, they would just turn it on, because it's not a political issue. It's about keeping people warm and keeping prices low for people. They don't care. So they're going to, play their politics and delay turning on Nord Stream 2. It's going to have to come on sooner or later, but they're going to drag it out, and people are going to suffer, and the prices are going to go up, and the political class will somehow manage to shift the blame to Russia. In the meantime, Nord Stream 2 is the end of the gas transit through Ukraine.
That's right.
Once Nord Stream 2 starts running, Ukraine is really screwed.
Yeah.
What's Ukraine going to do now? I mean,
are
they going to blame Russia as well? Or are we going to run into this reverse flow fiction again? Is this what they're going to talk about, this reverse flow of gas fiction to Ukraine, which is a complete lie?
Well, absolutely. But before we just get on to Ukraine, can I just make a point, which is, the utter illogic of European policy. On the one hand, you have Europeans, you have the Commission, you have the British, you have all sorts of people complaining that Europe buys too much Russian gas, that the Russians are selling too much of the gas that's consumed on the European market, and that this is somehow a bad thing. On the other hand, they simultaneously say that the Russians are not selling enough gas on the European market. It's not quite clear what exactly it is that the Russians are supposed to do. Are they supposed to provide Europe with more gas or less? There's never any clear answer to this. And in terms of pipelines, well, as you correctly said, the pipeline is there. All they need to do is turn it on. And I'm not saying it's going to solve all the problems, but it will solve many of them because it's connected to the Arctic fields that the Russians have developed recently, which do not pass, the gas from them does not pass through easily the utterly decayed and broken down Ukraine pipeline network. So it can't be sent in the way that people insist in Europe that it must be sent through Ukraine. Now, let's talk about Ukraine, because Ukraine has taken all these problems and it's taken them and made them an order of magnitude worse for itself. Now, Ukraine used to have, it was the major place where the pipelines passed through. Pipelines have been left to decay. They've become, they're no longer reliable. Putin's made a point that if you send too much gas through these pipelines, there's a real possibility, there's a real risk they might burst. And he's not wrong about that, by the way. I've seen plenty of energy specialists confirm that is the case. Ukraine also inherited from the Soviet Union the biggest underground gas storage places in Europe. They are enormous because what used to happen was the Soviets would send their gas there, keep it in storage, and then transfer it to Europe during the winter. And so the storage systems in Ukraine are enormous, but they're also empty because, of course, instead of Ukraine doing what it used to do, buying gas directly from the Russians, they have been engaging, as you absolutely rightly say, in this fantasy that they're actually buying the gas in Europe and that the energy, this gas is flowing upstream from the pipelines, up the pipelines from Europe back into Ukraine, that is in effect reverse flow. Now, that is impossible. You can't have gas flowing down and up at one and the same time. I mean, it doesn't work like that for obvious reasons. So what in actual fact has been happening is that Ukraine siphons off gas with the Europeans' agreement that's intended for Europe, and then it pays pays the Europeans, the European customers, for the gas that it's siphoning off, and is pretending that this is European gas instead of Russian gas. But by doing that, it's not filling up its storage areas because it's not actually buying gas directly from the ultimate supplier, which is Russia. And now, of course, it's got itself into an absolute awful mess because it's having to pay the Europeans for Russian gas at precisely the time when European prices for gas are absolutely exploding. And Ukraine doesn't have the money to do that. So they got no gas in their reserves, and they don't have the money to buy gas to pay the Europeans for the Russian gas that is passing through their pipelines. Now, this is causing an extraordinary political crisis in Ukraine, one which isn't widely reported in the West. The former Prime Minister, Yatsenyuk, remember him? He's now come along and he's criticised the government Zelensky's government for not having acted in the summer to fill up these big gas reserves, these storage reserves. He doesn't explain how to do that. And you see there's been a statement now from a confederation of Ukrainian business leaders. In fact, I understand most of Ukrainian industry, who are now telling the Ukrainian government that, they've got to bite the bullet and talk to the Russians and negotiate some kind of a supply agreement. But, of course, that the political problems for Zelensky and the Ukrainian government in doing that are enormous, even though they are self-created.
Siphoning, i.e. stealing. That's why they're in this mess. Siphoning's a nice word for stealing. They were stealing the gas.
Absolutely.
With the EU's blessing.
Yeah, with the EU's blessing. Not exactly stealing, because they're paying the Europeans for it. But that's what it amounts to. It's a fiction. It's an absolute fiction. I mean, they're pretending that they're buying gas in Europe, whereas actually they're helping themselves to Russian gas and paying the Europeans hush money to conceal the fact that that's what they've been doing. That's what reverse flow really is. And of course, the money they've been paying the Europeans is money that the Europeans have been giving them to do that. So the whole thing has been just a ludicrous fiction, which has been bad for Ukraine. It's been bad for Europe. And of course, it's one reason why the Russians are heartily sick of the whole business and why they've decided to build all these alternative pipelines instead. Well, now this fiction is colliding with reality, and Ukraine doesn't have the gas in its reserves to cover itself for the winter, and it can't afford to pay the hush money or protection money, if you prefer, to the Europeans for what it was doing previously. So it's in a hole.
What a clownish scheme, and that's where you get to the heart of the matter for this video. What a clownish scheme by Zelensky, who played a clown on TV, so no surprise there. What a clownish scheme from Zelensky. Yatsenyuk is back in the picture, another clown.
Yeah.
Yats is our guy, according to Victoria Nuland, right before she said F the EU. Yats is our guy. And, of course, you have the EU leaders who are all in on this clownish scheme. And you know what, Alexander? When people start to pay high prices for their gas in Europe, when people start to suffer and freeze, when people are starting to pay 10 times more for a steak, for whatever goods they're going to buy at the grocery store, for milk, for eggs, that is when the people are going to say, you know what, our leaders are a bunch of incompetent clowns. Yes. That's when it's going to hit them. Before it didn't hit them. No. Now it's going to hit them. And that is why the EU and the US and the collective West is in such a damn panic to get everyone with the QR code and under control, because they are so scared that when people are going to really start to suffer because they can't heat their homes or they can't buy their food, that they're going to turn on the absolute terrible leadership that is in front of them, the incompetence that is just staring at them straight in their faces, which they were ignoring because Orange Man was bad and tweeting stupid stuff. So they ignored the incompetence of their leaders for many, many years because they were obsessed with Orange Man bad and all the gaslighting and white this, white supremacist this, and racist that. But now it's going to hit them where it hurts. And that is why you have this panic to get everyone QR coded up.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's that famous expression by that French philosopher, when the people begin to reason, all is lost. And that's, it seems to me, the problem. I mean, they don't want the people to reason. So, of course, you distract them with all sorts of other things. You come up with all the things that he was talking about, the control mechanisms to prevent them protesting and coming out and voting and doing all the kinds of things that they might otherwise do. And, of course, you raise all the boogie figures, the Russians, the Orange Man, all of these people who've wrecked what was in all other respects the perfect economic system that was working with, startling efficiency and was producing all the heating and energy that you possibly needed. It's not your mistakes, it's somebody else's dark acts. Well, of course, it's an absurd argument, and it shows the extent to which, as I said, the Europeans have completely lost the picture. But what do you expect from people who are ideologues? I mean, we've made comments about how incompetent these leaders are in Ukraine, but look around you in Europe and tell me, is there a single leader of a major country? I'm not talking about the small ones, I'm talking the big countries, Italy, France, Germany, Britain, who is really able to get on top of this thing. These people know a great deal about how to spend money. That's what they do. I mean, they know how to spend, but they don't know how to make. They don't know how to create conditions for industries to function, for gas supply situations to deliver, how any of that sort of thing works. And because they don't know about these things, they engage in fantasies like, that Putin, in the Kremlin can simply dial a switch and the gas will go flowing through Ukraine, and and they come up with these elaborate and fantastic schemes like, gas is flowing down the same pipe in two directions at one and the same time.
No, I mean, just to make it more real for everyday people, why should I pay more living in Greece for my energy, for the gas that's going to come into my apartment to heat my homes? Why should I pay more for it? Because the damn idiotic Greek government couldn't sit there at one of these EU Council meetings and say, no, we are not going to allow Ukraine to siphon off gas. It's not right. It doesn't make sense. This is not the way things work. This is idiotic. How come they couldn't do that? The EU is at fault.
Well, absolutely, because, of course, they can't do it. They won't do it because they have to be good Europeans. And because that means being good Europeans, you can't make Russian talking points. And that's what people would say, because if you do that, you're siding with the evil Putin in the Kremlin against the good Ukrainians who are, fighting heroically to defend their country. And, if you engage in those kind of fantasies, if you indulge in those sort of fictions, then of course you're going to put your people in a very difficult position, because of course that's not real economics. That's not how things are really done. That's not how to operate logistical and energy chains or all of those things. So ultimately, what you're left with is two things. You do all the things that you talked about. You create the distractions, the policies of distraction and the policies of control. And at the same time, you blame the other side. You blame the bad man in the Kremlin for your problems, which are entirely of your own self-creation.
Siphon off the gas because the ends justify the means.
Absolutely.
That is the sick, twisted ideology of the European Union.
Absolutely.
End of the United States, end of this Biden White House as well. The entire
Absolutely.
left. Siphon off the gas, steal the gas because the ends justify the means.
Absolutely, because they have ideological ends for which they never worry about the resources. They don't match their resources to their objectives. They don't sit down and say, well, what is our priority? Our priority is to keep people warm in the winter at an affordable price, to keep the lights on, to keep the heating on, to keep the factories working and the businesses working. What their priority is one, expanding the EU, because that's obviously a priority, and of course, playing the kind of ideological and geopolitical chess games, which is what they're really all about. So, of course, they're not interested ultimately in what goes on with Western consumers and Western businesses and people of that kind. Even Ukrainian business people are now complaining about this. Even in Ukraine, which is dangerous to talk about, doing a deal with Russia. You could suffer consequences if you do that. The leader of the opposition party, the main opposition party, who wants to start talking to the Russians, is actually in prison now. But even in Ukraine, there are people who are prepared to do that. But they are not in the political class. They're in the business community. And they're not being listened to.
No, yeah. I mean, the Ukraine people got lied to since 2013-14. They've been lied to now for the better part of 5-6 years. They've been lied to, period.
So And so have the people in Europe. I mean, they've also been told things. I mean, they've been told nonsense. I mean, reverse flow is nonsense. Yes, you can't send gas up and down a pipe at one and the same time. Try to do it. I mean, it's impossible. It can't be done. But that's what most people in Ukraine have been told for the last 5-6 years, have been told that that's what's actually happening. It's nonsense. I would add that one of the things we discovered in Britain this winter is the fact that Britain actually does use Russian gas. We've been repeatedly told we don't, because we, buy our gas from all sorts of other places. But ultimately, it seems much of the gas we've been buying, its ultimate source is Russia. But of course, we haven't been told that. We've been told instead a fairy tale, that we buy it from the Netherlands, from Norway, from all sorts of other people, without actually being honest about the fact about where it's really coming from.
What a joke. Who cares? Russian gas. Look at where Russia is. Look at where Europe is. It's a natural fit.
Yeah.
What is the big deal if people in the UK get it from Russia? If it's cheap, if it heats up your home, and it's reliable and stable.
Yeah.
What's the problem?
Well, it's a problem for some people, and unfortunately they're the powerful ones, because they have ideological objectives that are detached from most people's lives.
We'll leave it there, Alex. I find it amazing that people like the Yatsenyuk decide to pop their head out of the
I know.
Of nowhere every now and then.
Well, he's scenting an opportunity. You can be sure that he's now himself thinking about his great returns. So don't count him out entirely. In Ukraine as well, I'm afraid the more you fail, the more you succeed. And you can't fail more completely than Yatsenyuk did. So he's exactly.
Unless your name's
Exactly. But I would say, on the contrary, he's destined for great things. I mean, given, as I said, the totality of his failure, he can't rise too far.
Yeah. The European Parliament gave Navalny an award on human rights.
Well, indeed.
I mean, what more can you say?
I know. Yeah, I know.
God.
Exactly.
Anyway, all right, we'll leave it there, everybody. The Duran.locals.com, and go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code Real News, and look for us on Rumble, BitChute, ODYSEE, and Super U. Take care.